the fiscal year. Thank you all for making the time to be here today. Ellen, do we have any apologies?
No apologies received.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the appointment of the chair and vice chair for the committee for this forthcoming year. I understand Councillor Lofts has confirmed that he is happy to continue as the chair of the committee and that no other members have put themselves forward for this position. Would anyone else like to put themselves forward at this point? Okay, so I take it at that point that members are content to approve Councillor Lofts as chair. Okay, sold. Councillor Lofts is therefore appointed as chair of the committee for financial year 23-24. Thank you very much, Councillor Lofts. The vice chair of the committee must be an independent member, and I understand Dave Phillips has put himself forward for this position. Is the committee happy to approve this? Yes. Okay, Dave Phillips is therefore appointed as vice chair of the committee for 23-24. The webcast will now be paused briefly and then I'll hand over to the new chair. Thank you very much.
Very nice to see you. We hope we see you again and again. Right, so are there any urgent items or announcements? No? Okay. Items to be considered in the absence of the public and press? No. Declarations of interest? Yes, David.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks everyone for voting me in as Vice Chair. Just to say, we've got an item on South Yorkshire Police and potential merger. I'm in the process of being appointed to the South Yorkshire Police Audit Committee. I don't at the moment foresee conflicts of interest on that, but it's possible that there will be a conflict at some point if we're discussing future Audit Committee arrangements or something. So I wanted to formally log that and bring that to everyone's attention. And if anyone thinks I'm conflicted at any point, or I do, obviously I will step back from that item. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is reports from members and questions, but before I do that, can I just do a round of introductions just in case our mayor doesn't know anybody or we don't know our mayor. So I'll start with me. I'm Phil Lofts, I'm chair of this and a councillor in Barnsley.
Austin White, member. Sorry. No. Austin White, member of this audit committee and representing the city of Doncaster.
Paul Schofield, I'm one of the independent members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Anna Mullen. I'm the internal audit manager for RSM, who took over as internal auditors from the 1st of April 2023.
Hi, so I'm Aaron MacDonald, an assistant manager also from RSM, the internal auditor, so it's nice to meet you.
I'm Oliver on the net.
Microphone.
You seem surprised.
It's all going swimmingly, isn't it? I'm Oliver, I'm the mayor. Nice to meet you.
Hi everyone, I think we've all met. I'm Martin, Chief Exec. Good to see you.
I'm Lynn Sutton, I'm the Health and Safety Advisor.
Tim Taylor, Director of Public Transport Operations at the Command Authority.
Councillor Ian Auckland, appointed by Sheffield City Council.
Dave Phillips, independent member of the committee.
Thank you very much. Just a formality, but there we go. Okay, so reports from and questions by members. Are there any? Nope. Okay. Questions from members of the public? No. So minutes of the previous meeting. Are these correct record?
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. Are there any actions on those? No. So, the official welcome to the Mayor. Very, very welcome. Oliver, do you want to say anything to us?
Would you mind? Could I just
Please
sort
do.
of just start as I mean to go on, I suppose, which is just to say thank you to everybody for the work that you do. I know this is not the glamorous end sometimes of politics, but it is hugely important, and also I know an incredible amount of work, and just looking at the papers, clearly is a really big job and really important to the health and well-being of this organisation and therefore the whole of South Yorkshire. So I guess I just wanted to start by saying thank you, because I recognise that this takes a lot of commitment and work and effort. I hope that the work that you do and therefore we do together only becomes more important, because I am absolutely committed to trying to make devolution work for South Yorkshire and therefore grow the powers that we have here in the region, the power, money and control that South Yorkshire has to be in charge of its own future. And I'm committed to making that happen, and there's all sorts of ways that we're wanting to do that. But as the powers and resources that come from this organisation grow, clearly the audit of that transparency and accountability that is required needs to grow too. So I am committed to doing that. I think we've seen in other parts of the country where that goes wrong, it is a challenge not just to the mayor, and that is absolutely right, but also to the whole of the region. It brings the whole system into disrepute if we do not get this right. So I see this as fundamentally important to how we do business in South Yorkshire, because I want to be absolutely transparent and accountable and offer myself up to be able to engage with not just this process but broader processes out there in the public gaze too, because I know that we need to make sure this works. And to a certain extent, devolution is an experiment in democracy, and that requires us all to lean into these sorts of processes to be able to demonstrate that we're doing this in the best possible way. So I'm committed to doing that. I welcome this opportunity. I'm grateful for the work that you do, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone around the table.
Thank you. In our little informal pre-meeting earlier, we considered a few questions. You'd be surprised if we didn't. So, does anyone want to start with one of those?
Thank you, Chair. Item 10 is the governance review. So we'll talk about that with some detail. But could you just outline what improvements you hope to see from that review, the new structure going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should start by saying I'm really optimistic about the changes that we've made and the process that we've gone through. And I know that Martin and officers across the MCA and across local authorities have worked honestly tirelessly to try and make that happen, because when I came into post, one of the things that I was most conscious of was the relationships between the different local authorities and the MCA, and the work of this organisation in actually fostering better relationships and how crucial that was. And I was partly conscious of that because of my former life as an employee at the LEP. I used to work at the Local Enterprise Partnership when the Local Enterprise Partnership was pretty much brand new, and obviously the LEP was a forerunner to the MCA. I'd also worked at Barnsley Council. I've just been around South Yorkshire politics for long enough to know that if the relationships across the region don't work, then devolution doesn't work and we don't get anything done. So I was really conscious of that when I came in. That had been reinforced to me through the election campaign and conversations I'd been having with both partners and other stakeholders across the region. So I wanted to try and make sure that worked. So I asked for a review of the MCA's functions from Martin and the senior team, which they embraced, and then we came to a governance review through that process. So in terms of the improvements that I would like to see, well, first and foremost, and I think we're already seeing the fruits of this, I'd like to see the best possible relationships across South Yorkshire. So the relationships between the local authority leaders and me, between the local authority leaders themselves, and then clearly our communities, is fundamental to how we operate, and I think it wasn't in the best possible place. So I think the thematic boards didn't necessarily work effectively to get decisions made that help move us forward, but they also weren't transparent and accountable. And so actually I think giving leaders the opportunity to lead portfolios and be responsible for a specific area of work, and then working with me to then deliver against our priorities, feels like it's much more accountable, because actually you can see the person that is responsible, and we can then talk to our communities about what we're trying to do specifically and directly through those leaders. So that's what I'm hoping for, is a much more responsive, accountable process, but also one that is much more focused on delivery, because I think this organisation has not unfairly been criticised for not delivering on its priorities and delivering. When we get money from government, we don't always spend it as quickly as we should, as effectively as we should. So I think we are now in a place where, with the new team that Martin is leading, doing much better on that sort of work over the last 12 months. I think we've seen a significant improvement in the delivery of this organisation, and I'm really pleased about that. We've still got some way to go, I absolutely acknowledge that, but I think the efficiency of this organisation is kind of paramount in the changes that we're making. But first and foremost, like I say, the partnerships and the relationships are what I want to see improve. I think I have a job to do, which is around my transparency, my accountability to the public, my engagement with the public scrutiny that this job requires, is something that I will continue to be focused on in my role. And I don't just think that's about governance changes, because frankly you can have all the governance changes in the world. Actually it's about an attitude and a stance, and so I absolutely want to lean into that opportunity to be as transparent and as accountable as I possibly can be to the public at large. I think the governance changes help us be more effective and efficient and develop better relationships, but you can't have one without the other, so I'm conscious of both sides of that coin.
Will that lead into a better public perception, and will the public see the results of the changes?
Look, I certainly hope so. I think that the public in South Yorkshire, and we've seen it most clearly in Sheffield, but I think it's evident across the rest of the region too, want to see political leaders who are responsive to their needs, their demands, the things that are need addressing in right across our communities. And so I hope that people see in this organisation and see in me somebody who is responsive to what the things that we need to do. Now, like I say, some of that's about governance, and you can't take decisions quickly enough if you haven't got the governance right. So some of this is about us being able to do things more swiftly and more effectively. But ultimately, it's about kind of just leaning into that opportunity to talk about what we want to do as a region with our communities and be responsive to that when you have those conversations. And so I hope that the communities of South Yorkshire see me as somebody that is actively trying to engage our communities in that conversation, and I hope that leads to a better perception of what politics looks like, but also what the mayor does. And I know that there is a challenge still for me to take on, which is about the public awareness of what this organisation does and the public accountability. I know that, and I'm absolutely and actively trying to engage our communities in a variety of different ways, and be that social media, public meetings, the work I do on Radio Sheffield every month to actually talk to people face to face, virtually, but face to face, and answer any questions anybody has about the work that we do. I will always come and talk. So if people invite me, if there are meetings, public meetings, I will always come and talk, because I think it's really important. It's one of the big advantages, I think, of devolution. The decisions that we take in this building, that this organisation takes in partnership with local authorities, I look people in the eye when I take those decisions. That's about kind of a community of 1.4 million people across South Yorkshire in a way that ministers in Westminster just can't. You know, we can do that here in the region. I'm actively trying to have those conversations with our communities, and I hope that leads to a better perception, both of me, of this organisation, but frankly politics more broadly, because you will know, we will all know, that ultimately people do not hold politics in high esteem, and I think we're trying to change that here in South Yorkshire.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Is there anything else? Yes.
Can you talk us through how you see the sort of formal communication between lines between this committee and you working, so that if there are issues that we feel we need to escalate up to you, that we know we've got a line to get them back to you, and equally if there's anything you need us to cover, we've got a formal line back again.
Absolutely. So formally, I'm very happy to offer regular attendance at this meeting. I think that, you know, that's absolutely how this should work. I think if in terms of my office and Martin, it's a cliche, but clearly our door is always open. So anybody that wants to engage in a conversation about anything that we cover here, or would like to cover here, I'm really happy to have that conversation, either formally in terms of kind of setting up a meeting to have that conversation, to be able to feed into this committee, or frankly informally over a cup of coffee if anybody wants to have a conversation with me about things you think we could be doing better, differently, that need addressing. I'm really happy to have those types of conversations too, but formally happy to come here, happy for any information to be sent through to our officers. I'm sure Martin feels the same way, and then respond in kind so it's on the record and do it in that way too. So however people want to try and engage in that process, I'm happy to lean into it, because as I say, I think this is fundamentally important to not just doing the right thing, but be seen to be doing the right thing, because I think, as I say, that perception point is really important. So however you would like to lead us in that conversation, I'm happy to be led.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, of course overview and scrutiny and audit are central to the process, as are the thematic boards, etc. Would you be content if we diaried in 2 meetings a year between the vice chair and chair and yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that we could guarantee that twice a year we met you face to face and discuss issues.
Absolutely happy to do that, and I don't think we should think of 2 as the ceiling. I think we should think of that as the floor, right? So if there are other times when you think there is something that has come up by exception that you would like to talk to us about, I think we're always happy to have that conversation, because we need to be able to have those clear lines of communication. So yes, absolutely, 2 formal meetings a year feels really sensible to me. If there are other events, other issues that you would like to discuss, I'm always happy to have that conversation.
That's just a time management thing.
Yeah, sure. No, of course. Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Oliver. I do think you've identified 2 areas that need attention, possibly for a long time. So relationships and decision making. I think you might recognise the conversation's flipped the other way now. You can never quite get it right. It's a bit centralised. It's a bit all one party, frankly, is one concern. And the West Yorkshire have a slightly different model, which is a bit more structured with a separate committee for transport, for example. So I just wonder, and of course leaders will have quite a lot to do. So I just wonder how you would answer that criticism, and how you would see things working in practice. And I certainly think informal meetings are a chance being more open, and attending this committee and the scrutiny board, because they're the 2 ways, like 2 checks. And then my second question is, as you say, we're perhaps the unglamorous end of politics, but there's a lot of unglamorous stuff in your relationship with central government, and I just wonder where you see that going as such in organisational terms, because sometimes we appear to miss out on funding opportunities. My particular bee in the bonnet is bus franchising for a long time, and we don't seem to be getting some of the money that we might have hoped for. And I just wonder what you see is the problem there.
So I think on your first point, I think I would respond with some humility, frankly, and to say that I don't think we're necessarily at a finished state. I acknowledge entirely that we have some work to do in terms of developing those relationships and being able to have those conversations, perhaps informally, perhaps formally, with other partners and parties within South Yorkshire. So you're right, I think, that there is this potential for us to be seen as a centralising force, when actually what I would like to be able to do is have that conversation right across South Yorkshire. I think you probably know me well enough to know that I am hopefully quite collaborative and want to take that collaborative, and I'm not a partisan politician, so I'm absolutely committed to working across parties wherever I can to try and take decisions that are in the best interests of South Yorkshire, because frankly I know we do not have a monopoly here in this building on knowledge or experience or wisdom. So I'm very happy to have those conversations. We were just talking to Tom Hunt yesterday about how we can work within the committee system in Sheffield, for instance, to be able to make sure that we are actually working within that system rather than against it. And I think there is, if you're not careful, there is a potential for us to be able to look like we are not kind of acknowledging the very clear demand from Sheffield to work in a different way. So I'm happy to acknowledge that, and happy to work with you and with the Green Party in Sheffield in particular, but right across South Yorkshire, frankly, to be able to deliver on some of our shared commitments and objectives. For instance, as much as I have challenges sometimes with Conservative Party colleagues, Nick Fletcher, for instance, in Doncaster, we meet every 2 weeks in order to be able to kind of work together on the airport. Now, that's not always easy, but actually I think it's really important for moving that that situation forward. So I'm really happy to work within the system that Sheffield have, and like I say, broadly across South Yorkshire, to be able to get that right. But I also think that it can't just be councillors, it can't just be politicians, this has to be our communities too, and giving our communities a very clear and direct line into this organisation, so that we are actually listening to communities, not just filtered through politicians, but actually directly hearing from people who have challenges in South Yorkshire too. In terms of your question about central government and about those relationships and the lack of funding for some of the big things that we want to do, it's a frustration, as you can imagine, to me and everybody else. I think the BSIP funding was the clearest example of where this organisation, this region, missed out on funding, which frankly we desperately need. So on bus service improvement plan funding, we asked for 474 million, I think it was, £1 million. I'm looking in Gareth's direction, hopefully. And we didn't get a single penny of that, the largest region in the country not to receive any money at all. And we're now seeing the challenges that have resulted from that lack of funding feed through into the system. So I have challenged the government repeatedly on that money and why we didn't get any. We're now engaged in a review of bids to understand what we've been doing right and what we haven't been doing so well, because I want to learn about what we've done. But sometimes this is just party politics, I'm afraid, and sometimes this is about a government that don't want to deliver for South Yorkshire. On the other hand, and to be fair to this government, I think it's fair to say that the relationships in South Yorkshire, the delivery of South Yorkshire, has not always matched our rhetoric. And I think that's probably fair to say too. So I think that actually getting into a better place where actually we are able to deliver against our priorities, where the relationships and partnerships across South Yorkshire are strong, so that we can actually have disagreements, absolutely, and it is absolutely right to have disagreements sometimes about policy, but ultimately come out with a decision, a direction of travel, and we're all committed to that direction of travel right across the piece, and that includes Sheffield and the other parties in Sheffield, means that actually government can have confidence in us to deliver. And I think I want this government and any government to have confidence in South Yorkshire as a partner in delivery. And I think we can do that, and we are on the way to doing that, and I'm really pleased and proud of that. We've still got some way to go, and we will continue to work at it. But I think we're in a much better place now, and if we can show to government that we are an active and willing partner, then I think they're more likely to lean into that relationship. If you look at things like, for instance, the investment zone, if you look at some of the other things that government are now doing with us, we are in a better place, and we seem to be getting the fruits of that labour. There's still some way to go, and clearly from my perspective, I think it will be easier. I hope it will be easier when if we have a Labour government. But you know, that's for tomorrow. For today, we're going to do everything we can to have that, to give confidence to government that they can work with us.
If I may, Chair.
Please, yes.
Just to add to a few points that Oliver's made, just to build on this. Our current governance arrangements, as they have been, and also the way in which the MCA has been operating, if you take a bird's eye view of that, you could actually argue that there has been a great deal of resource locked down, inward looking, within the MCA. You drew the comparison with Wyker. Wyker is a much bigger combined authority with far more significant staffing and other resources. This has been, and still is, a relatively small MCA, is growing with the responsibilities, but can only do that within the means that are available. Therefore, there's been a small team trying to support a big governance set of arrangements, and that has therefore committed a great deal of resource to working within as opposed to working out with. So, and I'll explain this more as we talk through the MCA review report, but actually I think now we are going to be in a place where the MCA, the politics of the MCA, can be more outward looking and can be more open to scrutiny. It does place, for the first time, Audit, Standards and Risk Committee and ONS in a place where they are far more significant within that governance framework. They've always had their importance within that because they're statutory, but it's been a busy environment in which to operate. That is significantly decluttered as a result of what we will be doing, and there becomes a much clearer relationship between direct MCA board decision making in ONS and audit and standards. So I would also add to Oliver's comments about greater and clearer levels of transparency and the opportunity for ONS and audit and standards and risk to begin to mobilise more in the role, the statutory role that they have.
And just on thank you. Just about Councillor Auckland's point about engagement with government, I hope you've been told, sorry, apologies Chair, that I have to leave at 25 to because I've got a meeting with the Secretary of State for DWP, so I apologise that is why I'm leaving at that time, but hopefully to get some more money out of him, that's my plan.
Yeah, go do it. Okay, if there's nothing else on that. Go on then.
I didn't attend the pre-meeting.
No, you
either,
see,
so
as I
this is
say.
where it's
Freelancing. Got it.
So just at the very basic level then, Oliver, we did a transport risk meeting on Monday, which we'll report back to, and I summarised as you can't get the staff, you can't get the rails, and you can't get the money.
Yeah.
These are all basic sort of things. Does that keep you worried in terms of your what you want to achieve?
Transport is the single biggest challenge that I think we face as a region through this organisation. So the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing that genuinely worries me, is public transport in South Yorkshire, and particularly the state of our bus network. I was elected on a promise to fix public transport in South Yorkshire, and I am absolutely committed to that goal, and I don't make any bones about the fact that that's really difficult to do. We have suffered from 40 years of privatisation in this region, and your point about franchising is absolutely right in my view. So I want to get us to a place where we are transforming how public transport works in South Yorkshire, but ultimately that can only come with the support of a partner in government who will help us get through that challenge. And I'm not sure we have that at this moment in time. In terms of staffing, yes, there are challenges in this market. It's always difficult to get people in the public transport space because it's a very competitive market, and frankly the private sector are always going to pay better than we can. I think that there is a challenge absolutely about getting government to pay attention to the specific challenges that we face here in South Yorkshire. That said, I think we are making some progress. I've met with the Bus Minister, the Rail Minister, I've spoken to the Secretary of State for Transport. We are absolutely making the case day after day after day that we are specifically suffering some absolutely acute challenges here in our region. But I'm committed to doing whatever I can to move us forward on public transport with the resources that we do have. I can't do much about the money. So we have a certain amount of money. I will use whatever I can and beg, borrow and steal. Frank, I probably shouldn't say that in front of the risk committee, but you see what I mean. I will do everything I can to try and get the money we need in South Yorkshire to move things forward. But ultimately, through things like bus service improvement plan funding, if we don't get that money, it has real life consequences for South Yorkshire. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that government understand that we are committed to making changes happen, that we really desperately need that support. If they don't give us that money, we are frankly left in a dire situation. So I will do whatever I can with the resources I have. I will build a system here in South Yorkshire with the resources that we have that is the best system we could hope for, and I'll keep on fighting that fight.
Need to leave you to get some more money then.
Yeah, I think you do. Sorry, I'm really sorry, and like I say, I'm really happy to meet regularly and then come back.
And thank you for coming today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for what you do. Cheers.
And our next item, thank you, Oliver. Our next item is with Martin Swales, who has just left us. However, yeah, just to introduce the item, you'll be aware that on the 5th of June, a series of recommendations were considered to strengthen the MTA strategic purpose, decision making, etc., and to address the organisation's capacity and capability for support and ongoing improvement. We've discussed that very briefly and tangentially there. So when Martin speaks to us, hopefully we'll be prepared to accept the report.
I can take any questions if there are any in the interim, if that would help.
Are there any questions to report? I'm reluctant to pass that by without Martin having the opportunity to speak to us.
you like to do the Police and Crime Commissioner
Okay, yeah,
report
and then we'll
while
come
we-
back, yeah.
we wait?
Yeah,
So
okay.
that
So, future Police and Crime Commissioner functions, item 11. Gareth is here.
Yeah,
Crack on.
thank you, Chair. So this is a report that has been, I've asked to be tabled just to make sure that the committee is fully apprised of the potential for some significant changes, further changes to the MCA's governance and its working relationship with the Office Police and Crime Commissioner and South Yorkshire Police. So on the 5th of June, the MCA board received the report that we've appended to the pack, and it talks about the potential for the transfer of functions from the OPCC into the MCA. And the conclusion of that report was that the Mayor, the leaders and the PCC agreed to write to the Secretary of State for the Home Office to ask for, for those powers to be vested into the MCA. Now there is a long route that would need to be followed for those powers to be transferred, but it would eventually align us to arrangements that we see in West Yorkshire, arrangements that we see in Greater Manchester and London. So there is a timeline presented within the paper, and it talks about the letter that the MCA, the PCC, and the Mayor, the leaders have now written to the Secretary of State, and that's in the system, and we're expecting a response from the Secretary of State's office quite soon on that. Subject to that happening, we expect that legislation would be tabled in Parliament in October, with consents issued in November, and for the formal legislation to be passed in early 2024. What would happen then is twofold. So there would be an election in May 2024. Now that requires that the current mayoral term would be reduced from 4 years to 2 years, and for there to be a new PCC election at that point. And that works for government because there are a number of other combined authorities that are currently coming through that could also have legislation passed for them and the elections at that point. So this is a fairly fundamental change for this organisation. It reflects part of our ongoing drive to take further devolution powers, as Oliver referenced, and I think it also speaks to the broader credibility of the organisation within government to be taking forward, taking on new powers. So there is an awful lot of work that will need to be done. There is a lot of practical integration activity that we've only just made a start on, and just prior to this meeting, I met for the first time some of the key officers from the police and the OPCC. But I think there are some implications for this committee that we'll need to start working through. So the committee will clearly be interested in changing governance arrangements. Committee will clearly be interested in the change to the risk profile associated with not just the practical integration process, but the long run of business as usual activity that comes after that. There will be some practical implications that we'll need to work through about internal audit, and some practical integration issues to work through about how this audit committee interacts with current governance arrangements for the oversight and scrutiny and the audit arrangements associated with the OPCC and the police. Now, there are a lot of questions. I don't have answers to most of those, but I wanted to table this now so it's on your radar. We'll expect to see changes to our risk register going forward, and as we start to build up that picture, we'll keep coming back to the committee and apprising on changes, and obviously seek your insights and advice about how we take this forward. So happy to take any questions at that point.
Yes.
Thanks very much for that summary, Gareth. It's good to see that the implications of this have been recognised, because my main concern was this is going to come in at the same time as we're doing annual accounts audit. We've already flagged up the risk we've got with the tram concession transfer, and this is going to be on it as well. So I think we all need to be very mindful of what that means for the organisation and the additional risks that we're getting, and it's good to see that you've picked that up already. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is the key practical risk associated with seeking these powers on this timeline. So just a reminder, the tram will come back to public control on the 24th of March. There will be an election subject to the passing of the relevant legislation on the 25th on the 5th of May, sorry. So there will be a lot of change happening in a relatively short space of time, and we'll have to be pragmatic about what change we can live with, what change has to flow. And we've got some experience of this associated with how we integrated the passenger transport executive, and I know there's an audit report in the pack today about that. There will be some things that we simply have to do by the election date, because the legislation will mean that the OPCC ceases to exist and the functions will be vested into the MCA. But there might be some practical things that we can defer to a later date, where there are existing systems and processes and so on, that we can change where we've got time to do so in a considered and controlled manner. But we're undertaking that process now, and as I say, when we get more detail, I think it would be incumbent on us to bring that back and for you to track this through the risk register.
Okay. In our pre-meeting, oh, sorry, I did look over there, I didn't see you.
Well, just late. Question, Chair. At the moment, the PCC has an advisory committee. If these functions taken on here, will there be, as it were, a separate police, the sort of thing that we've got now, which is the advisory committee, or is that to be determined as such?
Chair, if I may.
Yeah,
there will be a number of governance issues that need to be determined, but I think that will stay, because I think that's a statutory requirement.
Right.
Sorry, I think it's a slightly different kettle of fish, isn't it? Police oversight and politics as such, and the operational independence of the police function. So there would have to be, I guess, some sort of wall between the two when you're acting as it were in a policing capacity as opposed to the other stuff.
Yeah, there are Chair, sorry if
yes,
I may. The distinctions in the role of the Chief Constable and the operational responsibilities of the police through the Chief Constable, but nevertheless ultimately the PCC and therefore the Mayor will be the person who is responsible for the appointment or otherwise of the Chief Constable, but thereafter there has to be operational independence of the Chief.
You done?
Yeah.
Sneaks in at last minute.
And Chair, if I may just
Yes.
add one other quick point, just building on Gareth. The election in May of next year would of course be for the Mayor, with the PCC responsibilities contained within that. So not for there would not therefore be an election of a PCC next year.
Yeah. Okay, understood. Yes, there was a point raised at the pre-meeting about whether this committee will be auditing PCC and or the police budget, or are they the same thing?
I think this is one of many issues that we need to work through. I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that. I'm not entirely clear on the legislative context, whether there needs to be a differentiation or whether we can wrap it up into a broader committee arrangement. So this is on a list of things we need to get an answer to quite quickly and come back to you on.
Thank you. Okay, on that, we're recommended to note the paper. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And if we can then go back to Martin, I introduced the item earlier, Martin, whilst you were out way, and we assume you might want to speak to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Apologies, I had to just pop out. Yes, if I could please just to talk to the report for a few minutes. I think the first thing is that this is a very significant report actually in the evolution of what is still a relatively young organisation. First created as a combined authority in 2014, and then with the first mayoral election 4 years prior to May. So this is a new and a young organisation, and Dave, I think you were at the session last week, weren't you, with all of the exec directors? So for the first time, for new councillors and anyone who was interested in coming along, I held a session with the whole exec leadership board, which of itself is a new construct within the MCA. Not in terms of the individuals, because obviously there have always been exec directors and a chief exec, but the executive leadership board again brings sharper accountability and leadership in the way in which you would in any company structure, and that's now been up and running for probably 6-9 months as part of the changes. So I wanted new councillors to have the opportunity to meet everyone, know who we are, and it was a good session where we explored a number of different things, but an overview of the MCA. So there are a number of things that have changed and moved on, and I think my colleagues, predecessors, Oliver's predecessor in the chair with Dan, and my predecessor Dave, with Ruth and the team, worked very hard on that first stage of the journey. And this is about the next stage of the journey. And as Oliver described when he presented earlier on, he asked me on day one to undertake a review of the MCA, and that to have a number of different strands. The first was that as an organisation, how was it functioning, and what changes may need to be made. The second was the governance, and likewise, and then principally the third element is the external, the outward-facing relationships which the MCA holds with its key partners, with its local authorities, with government, and with financial investors, institutions, etc. I suppose, as with all governance, form does follow function. So what's the function? And one of the things that we've been assessing over the last 12 months is how effective are we as an MCA as part of that review? How effective are we at the principal functions of economic growth, some of the principal functions of transport, delivering A/B skills? How effective are we at attracting external investment into the region? And how are we performing economically as a region? And this is a primary instrument, the primary instrument for South Yorkshire to chart that future direction economically and help take it on its journey, working with our local authorities, working with our private sector partners. So a lot of what we've been trying to do this year has been about achieving that. So that the more streamlined nature of the governance also enables us to be more fleet of foot and responsive and a better partner when it comes to private investors, investment, less aborted cost, and hopefully sharper, swifter decision making. So a great deal of what we've been about this year has been to, over this last 12 months, has been to set up a set of governance arrangements that helps enable that improve, where we are improving our relationship with national government, both in Westminster and in Whitehall, and where we have become and are becoming more efficient as an organisation in the way in which we operate, with, of course, the resident, the customer, the citizen as the primary focus, and not forgetting that, and the delivery is what matters. So I think from a personal point of view, that's been a key driver for me. How does the MCA become a more effective delivery organisation? Not necessarily delivering the end service, because that's delivered in a number of different ways. And how do we make our processes, our systems, as sharp as the shortest route to market we can possibly have, but nevertheless keeping it safe and sound from a financial point of view and risk point of view. We have at the same time been stepping up our risk work, our health and safety work, in the way that you would expect an organisation to do those things. That's going to be a healthy, well-functioning organisation, driven by its MCA board and the executive leadership board. So there have been 3 or 4 key elements to that governance review. So if I could just expand maybe on a few of those. First of all, the actual governance, and then maybe the changes to the organisation, and then maybe some of the changes that we're now achieving in our relationships with our external partners. Some of this we've had the opportunity to discuss with you in an informal meeting that we had prior to the decision taken at the MCA board a few weeks ago. So I'm grateful to everyone's time for that. I did then promise to get the report straight out to you as soon as it was ready, and I did that separately. So I'm grateful for the time to explore in more detail again today. But this is based on that mayor and cabinet model approach, and with a far more visible function, if I could put it in that way, around audit standards and risk and ONS and that sharper accountability. It has the effect of streamlining a great deal from an MCA point of view. I think any of the officers who've been involved would say to you that it's been a very resource intensive set of governance. We have had a LEP and a LEP board in place at the same time, which has required support, service, etc. It has served the MCA well, but at the same time as the MCA governance review was triggered, government also triggered a review of LEPs, and with the driver of that being that powers and functions are more integrated into local democratic decision making. So the recommendations that have come from the MCA review also follow the rhythm of the government's LEP review. So we've had 2 things converging at the same time in terms of reviews of governance, which we've managed to bring together in the set of recommendations which you see before you. To continue that good relationship with business, but also to try and accelerate our economic interests in the way in which I described earlier on, in a way that we're not really achieving right now, we have set up 2 things. One is a business advisory board, and the second is a Mayor's Economic Advisory Council. The business advisory board being very much about the voice of business from within South Yorkshire, and the Mayor's Economic Advisory Council getting us into a space where we aren't at the moment, and that is beyond South Yorkshire. How can we bring to the table senior industrial business economic leaders who can help advise us on the direction of travel for South Yorkshire to build its economy and grow, who won't be involved in our decision making formally. It won't spend MCA money. It will be advisory, but with the calibre of individuals who we hope can help us on that next stage of the journey, which I think everyone would agree and accept. There are great examples of outstanding examples actually of best practice in South Yorkshire, with some of the economic initiatives, some of the translational research which has then been turned into thriving companies, but actually it's still too piecemeal, and it needs to be the norm, and that's where we need to get to together. And that every part of South Yorkshire's economy, each authority that forms the MCA, because I think we lose sight of that sometimes as well. We are the MCA, It's not the MCA exec, it's not the mayor, it's the local authorities and the MCA exec are the MCA. It is one board, it is one set of interests, but it relies upon us as an exec team to drive that forward, and it relies on the commitment of the various committees that form the governance, to people to give their time. So that's the voice of business. As for the organisation, I think we have focused very heavily in. I've attended a number of these meetings, but in the background, Chair, where, you know, for periods of time just to observe things. And I've heard Gareth explaining far better than I could just the sort of changes that we've been driving, and so I know that you are fairly well abreast of all of those, but with the intention of creating a more fleet of foot, agile organisation, which is far more delivery focused, where processes are far more streamlined, and we're not experiencing delays in the system where recipients of grants are frustrated by our lack of progress. An organisation that is far more collaborative in our relationships with our local authorities, and that we are as one, and a space in which we co-produce far more with our partners and with our authorities. And also the review has focused in on how do we elevate, build upon the strength of our reputation as a good place to invest from major investment institutions. And I know Gareth has kept you abreast of that, but likewise with government, who needed to feel more of our presence, and they are beginning to feel more of our presence in Westminster and in Whitehall in a more joined up way. And I do think the IZ is an example of where it is a demonstration of the confidence and the direction of travel that we're beginning to take, albeit still maintaining a big frustration around transport, as was highlighted earlier on. So, Chair, I'll leave it there for now. Happy to take any questions on any of that.
Yeah. First of all, I'd just like to make an observation, and not so much a question, and that is that a lot of my constituents habitually ask, what's the MCA done for us? And I think that's a very important point to keep in mind. When we're doing this business-wise, brilliant, coordinating strategies with businesses and other partners, we must keep the electorate on board. It must be transparent to them what we're doing. That's really just an observation. Questions? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to comment, if I may, Martin, that I think the new organisation has got much clearer managerial and political accountability. Drawing parallels from industry, I can see there's a bit of a matrix organisation that you've created here politically, in getting the political leaders from the authorities to own a portfolio, because I think that then starts to make the MCA and the local authorities work as one, whereas I think my experience before had been it seemed to be two totally separate levels of operation. And as you said, Chair, I think the general public don't understand what each one does.
Sure.
So I think that's really good in terms of the structure. And I think then the managerial accountability within the authority for delivery, with the clear executive director responsibilities, I think that will help too. My only one concern, and this will be borne out as we go through the next few months, is the capacity of the organisation to take on the work that the thematic boards were doing. And I think if we get the devolution of responsibilities and decision-making authority right, there's no reason why that wouldn't work either. So I think it's a positive step forward. Thank you.
Certainly a positive step forward, but we need the credibility of the public. Yes.
I mean, personally, I think the thematic boards muddle things up somewhat. So I think getting things clearer, I echo what you say, Chair. Just reflecting on the Mayor, what the Mayor said, and we've got this recommendation just to note the report, which is nice and straightforward. I just wonder, we have the Transport Risk Working Group, and Oliver identified getting governance right as important. I just wonder if we should consider, no more than that, consider setting up a governance review, risk working group, to just track things through once things have settled down, possibly something with scrutiny, but maybe just looking at the risks. So it's a suggestion.
That's something we can consider with Claire. Claire might want to make an input to that to future
Don't know
dates.
if Martin's got a view on that. Could be. It could be useful in due time. Would be my once things have settled down, but.
Chair, I wonder if that may be addressed by having a report back to the committee in 12 months' time that tracks progress, and we have a further discussion and at that point in time address any refinement.
I think we have governance on the audit work plan as well for internal audit, so it's opportunity to use that as the review point.
Yeah, I'm not awfully keen on crowding our agendas with sub-reports from subcommittees. I don't think any of us would be. But Martin's suggestions seem very sensible. We keep it in mind and take a report at a later date, if that's acceptable to all.
Could I suggest 6? I don't know. What's in a day? 6 months, 9 months,
hours.
less than 12 months.
Make a suggestion.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, go on.
Sorry, just another observation would be, I personally think 12 months is too long to let it go. I certainly agree with the point Gareth made about we need to keep this on our radar some way, because I think one of the risks that organisations face when they change their management structures is that things get lost. And there's lots of organisation changes in the past where things like safety has got missed out of the reorganisation, and so I think at some point this committee, as it's going along, needs to keep aware of how the organisation's working, and I personally would be worried about leaving it 12 months. We need to keep watching this to make sure that decision making doesn't fall behind and we don't import extra risks because people have lost the focus on what they're trying to do, and some of the relationships we've broken, and that's where it tends to go wrong, I think.
Yeah, it goes too far, then you have to backtrack, sort of thing. Yes.
So to interrupt, we have the internal audit for governance scheduled for January next year, so January 2024. Obviously the detail of the scope we identify nearer the time, but I think the focus of having governance was to look at the new arrangements, how well they've been embedded, so we can factor in kind of these concerns when we're doing our planning, so then you'll get an independent, but it's not 12 months, it's what is that? Like, feels like the right time next January to kind of have that third party assessment, and then that'll come back to this committee. Depending on what comes out of that internal audit may then, you know, depend on what action you want to take going forward, if we find any issues or we don't find any issues.
I just wonder if in the autumn we bring a short review paper just to update on where we've got to, and then use that as the means of informing the scope of the governance audit. So that's the second bite, and then if we need to follow up from there, we do it on the back of the findings, and then that becomes the third bite of the cherry.
Yeah, that seems like a very sensible suggestion.
I think I am the presenting officer. Chair, yeah, absolutely fine, great, that works well. Could we maybe do it at the back end of the autumn? Because the first meetings of the new structure really won't begin to kick in until September. So maybe if we made it November time,
Yeah,
which
I
then
think,
informs the
yeah.
work from January.
Yeah, I was certainly looking to the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, content.
December. Yeah,
Great
great.
report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Noted. Thank
Good
you.
to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. And item 12, terms of reference review. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So this report just presents a revised terms of reference. It reflects some of the proposed changes that the committee has put forward over the last few months. So this is just an opportunity to review those and suggest any further changes before the revised terms of reference goes on to the combined authority meeting in July as part of the wider constitutional changes. So apologies, the version that's in the published pack, for some reason the track changes moved off that, but I've provided members with a hard copy around the table so you can see the changes more clearly. So it's just to take any feedback on that, if any other changes are required to further strengthen them or provide any clarification. Thank you.
Yes.
Just a detailed one on page 3 of the paper. I think it's paragraph 3.9.
Yeah.
We refer there to the finance director and the monitoring officer. Now, I think we're pretty clear who the monitoring officer is because that's a statutory duty. Should we make the finance director the section 73 officer? Because I think it doesn't align with what your current title is. There isn't a person called the finance director in the organisation. Thank you.
So that's just a change of wording.
Yeah, if everyone's happy with it.
Ian?
I was happy with it before.
I was just preempting you coming in late. Okay.
Slowing mental processes, Chair.
Well, and me, so
Definitely.
we're on the same line there. Okay, so if we're all content, we'll note that report. Thank you very much, Claire. And item 13 is yourself again, Claire.
So this next item kind of follows on from the terms of reference. So this just proposes the work plan for the year, an opportunity for members to feed in any changes. I think a couple of points to note that at the moment the external audit activity is not plumbed into that schedule. I think that's just because of the timetable being a little bit unknown, different this year. I think, Dave, you might make a point about treasury management. And then there's also a query, so in Appendix B, where I've aligned the activity to the terms of reference, just a question around oversight of performance management activities and what the committee might expect to see around that, so I can take that away. So yeah, just looking for any feedback on any amendments that are needed to that work plan. Is it satisfactory? Is there anything else that's missing, etc.? Thank you.
Welcome to yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Yeah, on the treasury management, we've got the strategy in the mid-year report, and much as we all love treasury management reports, I think we need the outturn report on as well on there, which I couldn't immediately spot. And just a reminder, as we covered a couple of items ago, we're going to need reports now on the PCC merger and the governance and audit and etc. arrangements of that. So there'll be some stuff needed on that when you can work out. Yeah, you've got a lot to do, I think is my worry. But anyway.
Anything further? Any additions? No? Okay, noted. Thank you very much. And item 14, health and safety update. Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I've circulated the report up for the details up to the 31st of March. Just wondered if anybody had got any questions, concerns, or anything that they wanted to raise.
Thank you, Chair. as I'm new to the committee, Lynn, just one observation which I think we've touched on before. Doncaster's statistics for the safety for the interchange don't appear in the stats. Is that because it's a separate PFI
It is, yeah.
arrangement? So how does the safety management arrangements at Doncaster then differ from what it does say at Sheffield in terms of the interchange?
Well, we have no management of the interchange at Doncaster. It's, like you say, it's done by an external company.
And do we have any liability? If I, going home today, for example, if I trip the Doncaster interchange, is my action against the operator of the interchange, or is it against the authority?
It's against the operator of the interchange. We have no liability at all.
And if there were any lessons to be learned from an incident that happened in Doncaster, how would that get shared amongst the other interchanges in South Yorkshire?
We have an area customer services manager who meets with the PFI, whose name I can't remember. Tim, you might be able to help me, but I can't remember the name of the company. But he meets with them on a monthly basis, picks up any areas where we can learn, or we share things with them.
Okay, thank you. So is the authority's liability for accidents in that interchange then wholly transferred to the PFI operator? We don't have any residual risk from that?
As far as I understand it, no. So the building is operated, maintained with all operational risk and responsibility with the PFI operator. Our involvement is simply to hold the assets on the balance sheet and transfer payment to the operator through the unitary charge.
Okay, thank you. And if I can have just one more, Chair, just on Annex 4 that you've put out with the stats, is that profile between the 4 different authorities of the number of incidents, vandalism incidents in each area, is that typical for any quarter? Because I noticed there were a large number in Rotherham.
If I just look back, it fluctuates. It's not always Rotherham's the highest. I think in the period previous, Doncaster was higher. So there's no rhyme or reason for it, to be perfectly honest.
Just to note, Chair, that is for shelters and stops only. That's not interchange related activity, purely for on street assets only.
Do you know how much it costs us in a year? How much vandalism costs us to put right? To the nearest 100,000.
We invest. Sorry, I think we invest a couple of £100,000 a year in our shelter repair and maintenance programme. So it's a fairly significant cost.
Right, thank you.
And sorry, and it's worth noting, Chair, we also have not infrequent issues in terms of shelter damage or destruction from road traffic collisions where we don't have access to the details of the insurer or the vehicle involved was uninsured. So there's an additional burden, as Gareth describes there, from those kind of incidents.
If we have meetings with Doncaster, how much do we know about their stats, and would it be useful to put a separate section for them to compare?
I could definitely
just for information.
Yeah, definitely approach them and ask them if they can provide us with those. There'd be no harm in that. Then we would be able to see comparisons as to what's happening in other authority areas. Yeah, that's no problem. I'll take that action forward.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of points from the report. Paragraph 2.4, you talk about the fire risk assessments and outstanding actions. Half of the actions are done, but of the rest, the other half, 79%, are past their due date. You somewhat confidently say none of these are urgent, but can you just give us a tiny bit more detail on what's happening with that? And the second one is sort of similar. Following paragraph, you talk about emergency evacuation plans, and the need to do some more work on that. Are you happy that we're progressing that at a suitably quick rate?
Yeah. If I could take the first one, Chair, the fire risk assessments. If I can just give you some, can't think of the word now, but none of the actions in the first place were urgent from the fire risk assessor. Everything was medium or low risk. There has been an issue with the amount of work that we've given to the contractor. The contractor that we've got to do the work from the fire risk assessments is also our general maintenance contractor. So obviously they can only do one thing at once, so they've had to prioritise. That's why there's been a wait. I constantly monitor the actions that are outstanding, and if there are any that I think need a bit of a shove, then I do that. I'm quite confident that there's nothing that would cause us any issues. In relation to the emergency evacuation plans, since this report was done, like it says there, I've done a lot of work with other local authorities, the fire rescue, and as a result I put a paper forward, an internal paper for some additional resource, so that I'd have some comfort that we would be able to safely evacuate. That was authorised, and I believe from the 22nd of May, 22nd of May, we've had the additional resource. I'm confident now that if there is an evacuation, we can safely evacuate the interchanges.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Any more? Okay. So we'll note that report. Thank you very much. Thank you. And item 15 is Gareth. He's got a drink.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully committee members will recall that each year we bring the draft unaudited reports to the committee for oversight and review, and the committee provides challenge on what's in those draft accounts, and that performs part of the oversight and scrutiny function that is leads up to the external audit. Now we normally bring the accounts after we publish them for public inspection. So we publish them on the internet, bring them through to this committee for a review. The public inspection deadline was around 31st of May, Simon, just correct me if I'm wrong, and that's been brought forward from the previous year. So that was the deadline that government asked us to work to. There's been a lot of lobbying of government from the LGA, professional bodies across the sector, including ourselves and other MCAs, to say that bringing forward the public inspection deadline to the 31st of May didn't make sense. And it didn't make sense for two reasons. The first was that 21-22 accounts were still being audited, and ours are still open at this point. And also that the auditors themselves had told us that they weren't even going to start opening the accounts until January. So I've taken a decision that we won't, and we didn't, publish our accounts for public inspection on the 31st of May. Instead, we'd aim for the 30th of June. I've done that for two reasons. One is that we're awaiting the external audit response on how to deal with the pension revaluation, and that's a query that is still open today, despite us passing that query through to them, getting on a month ago now, Simon. And the second point is I do have a duty of care to the people within the finance team. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to flog themselves to publish to an artificial deadline when the auditors again are telling us that they won't even open those accounts for review for 6 to 7 months. So the accounts that we've presented through to you today are the single entity accounts for the passenger transport exec and the MCA. We'll then group those together for our group accounts, and we're aiming for the 30th of June. So we've presented these to you today, one, to give you a sense of where we're up to, two, to show you that we are doing as much as practically is possible for us to work to at pace towards the 30th of June. And the third is, again, just to make sure that you are cited on what we expect to be publishing for public inspection, and take on board any comments that you may have, any issues that you feel we need to address before we do publish them. Simon, is there anything to add before we open it up to query?
No, I think that covers it, where we are and what the the next stages are. So, yeah. So it's really, so if anybody's got any comments or observations in terms of the single entity counts, try and address those here and now. If that's not possible, we'll take it away and get a written response to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I found the covering reports of the accounts very helpful. Thanks. Had a bit of a look through the accounts. They look a really good effort, I think, at this stage, I thought. And, you know, personally, I don't have any. I think I'd prefer us to take a bit more time and get the accounts right than rush and put people under unreasonable pressure to get them done for the end of May. So I've got no issues with us sensibly deferring slightly, especially since it's going to take the auditors ages to get around to looking at them anyway. Just a few quick questions. Could we have a bit of update on what's happening on external audit for 21-22 and when we think they might finish? We yet again don't appear to have them here, which is a frustration. So that'd be handy. A couple of points in the narrative report. You've got quite a long explanation of the capital underspend of 177 million pounds. I couldn't spot quite as much on the revenue underspend of 28 mil, and I wondered whether a paragraph in the narrative report on that might be helpful. It's quite a big underspend. And while you're doing that, I know these figures always differ, but the surplus in the outturn report to the MCA is 3.7 million, which obviously is very different to the revenue underspend. So I wonder whether it's just worth somewhere in there, just explaining what the difference between those two figures are, because it's interesting for a reader. But other than that, I thought the accounts looked, you know, really good for this stage in the year. Thanks.
Who wants to say that?
I'll just provide the update on the external audit, and then Simon, the reconciliation to outturn to the accounts, if you can pick that one up. Yeah, and so
don't need it now, obviously, Simon.
I think last time we met, I took an action away to take up with Hassan and EY the timeline for the audit of the 22-23 accounts, which are before you today, and that was on the back of EY showing us a timeline that suggested that they wouldn't even open our accounts until January of 2024, and that was a problem for us because at the time we were concerned around capacity to deal with the tram coming back under public control in that window. And now clearly it's got even worse because now we're faced with an election in May and integration activity is associated with the Office for Police and Crime Commissioner. So I met with Hassan, and unfortunately it was a computer says no response at that point, that they were focused on the delivery of their 21-22 audits and wouldn't be able to get to us by January. So what I suggested at that point to Hassan was that I'd write to PSAA and ask them to look at the contract and whether we could fundamentally stop our engagement with EY and ask for the audit of the 22-23 accounts to be transferred to another provider. So we have engaged with PSAA. We put a proposal to them on those grounds. PSAA have made contact with EY about this and are putting some pressure now onto EY to find a solution for us. PSAA are advising, however, that they do expect a national response from government by the end of this month based on the evidence that was given by the Financial Reporting Council, who are the regulating body, I believe, at the moment, to a select committee in Parliament. So they are suggesting that there may be some sort of national response to how 21-22 audits are completed. And I've heard lots of suggestions about what that may look like, ranging from a mass qualification of 21-22 accounts where a line is written under everything and auditors are asked to move on, through to more capacity being put into the system. Where that comes from, I'm not sure. So things may overtake us in this space, but we are essentially pressing the panic button with PSAA and asking them to consider out-of-the-box solutions that would help us.
Okay. We'd be working up to that for some time, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see that we've got some movement from PSAA to support us. In terms of our for if we have to go ahead with January, what is that plan and when do we need to start putting it into action? Please.
I think the plan A right now is the, fingers crossed this gets started. Plan B is essentially that we have to beg, borrow, and steal capacity from partner authorities from buying in capacity from the private sector. And we're in a sort of fortunate space right now that the resource to do that is available. It's just accessing it, accessing people, which is the challenge. So it is a really tight labour market. But we would essentially need to stand up almost a separate team just to manage the audit, out with some of the major change events that we'll have, out with budget, business planning and close down that we'll have on at that point. So it's plan B isn't particularly acceptable to
Right, so given that situation, you've already started talking to the local authorities, and they've been positive-ish in their response, have they?
I wouldn't say positive. We've landed the points that we've got an issue. People's ability to free up resource themselves will be constrained at that time of the year. But that's my first port of call, because at least then we have people coming in from the sector who understands how to put together a compliance set of accounts and work in that space. I'd rather not start a recruitment exercise with private partners where we spend 6 months getting people up to speed.
Yeah. Okay. So if we put this off until the September meeting, which would be our next time to discuss this, is there any work we as a committee can do to support you in the interim on this?
I think for now it's helpful that the committee has been supportive in our efforts with PSAA, and I think if we probably get to the point where it might be helpful to have letters that come from the committee to PSAA expressing concerns. By September, hopefully we'll have turned up a resource and plan, and the finance leadership team have just pulled together essentially a work plan, a revised work plan for the rest of the year that's looking at resources in quite some detail. So we'll have that resolved hopefully by July, which gives us a little bit of time to work out, and then we'll come back to September committee with a plan of action on what we do, and then maybe with some asks of how the committee can help us at that point.
Thank you.
Well done.
I've got a question on 22-23, if I can move to that, unless anyone wants to talk about 21-22. Thank you. One of the reasons for the underspend on financing costs is the fact that we've slipped on the investment programme. Do we have any idea how much the potential inflation risk is in future years in delivering that slippage in capital investment?
So I guess it's guesswork going forward. The Bank of England and OBR's inflation rates are forecasting to decelerate quite quickly. I think the key risk right now is on inflation that's already taken hold on schemes that were going through development processes. So just this morning I've been on a call with some senior figures from the City Council around some of Sheffield's Transforming Cities Fund schemes that should have completed in March 23 and are now still in development, with some schemes expected to be in development through to January 24. Now the inflation on those schemes is multi-million pounds, and that means we are value engineering those schemes right now to try and get them back into the funding envelope. So that is, I guess, future inflation is a concern, but we're hopeful that those schemes that will be affected by inflation into the future will be building this into their development right now and focusing optimism bias and QRA and all sorts of risk allowances to take account of that as you'd normally expect. It's really schemes that have fallen into this high inflation environment that should have already really been completed, that we have a particular issue. So these schemes should have been completed by March 23. Because they're not even spades in the ground yet, we'll be procuring into a really high inflationary environment, very aggressive. So it's those schemes that we've got a particular concern about.
So therefore, if we're doing that, has the authority considered using any of the underspend on the financing charges to create a reserve to cover that? Or is it just to go back to project managers and say, that's the funding we've got, come up with a scheme that delivers against it? Because there's always the danger that you lose some of the benefits at the end of the day from why you were doing it in the first place.
Yeah, using our revenue surpluses that have been generated from cash held on deposit investment income to finance the CAP programme, I guess is the last resort for me, because I've got all sorts of other revenue pressures, not least on bus and potentially on tram coming forward, that I'd like to use that revenue for. I guess the little bit of slack in the system right now is that we are in receipt of a £500 million transport capital settlement that has largely not been committed. So that's given us quite a bit of flexibility to manage overspends or cost inflation within that envelope. So I'm not yet at the point where we're having to deal with capital pressures through our revenue, and I'm actually jealously holding on to our revenue surpluses to try and offset against the revenue pressures. But I'd take the point that it's an option.
Thank you. Anything further? No.
Chair.
Yes.
We're about to let the former internal auditors join us on screen.
Right, yes.
Could we propose that after that item we move on to item 22 to allow Pat to do a presentation, just shuffle things around a little bit, because I think we're getting a bit
yeah. So
pressed
we'll
for time.
take item 16
And then
item
and 17 and then 22. Is that okay?
So just say that again. 16.
So 16 and 17, which is both Grant Thornton colleagues,
and then 32.
and then move on to 22, so Pat can do hers. Is that okay?
Yeah, just got to remember.
Thank you. So I think they're just sorting out now that they'll let them in on screen.
Right. Okay. So.
Lisa and Emily on screen.
Okay, so the next item is 16. Are we taking those two together?
16 would be Emily, and then it would be Lisa.
Okay. Item 16, Emily, you're on. Sorry. Can you hear me, Emily? We can't
yes, I can hear you now,
yes,
thank
we can
you.
Hear you. Okay. Yes, Emily, next, please. Item 16, Annual Internal Audit Report, including Head of Internal Audit Opinion. The report presents the Internal Audit Annual Report, and go for it, Emily.
Thank you, Chair. So our annual Head of Internal Audit Opinion is contained within this annual report. To comply with the public sector internal audit standards, we have to issue, we have to report quite a bit of information to you, and as such, there's a lot of detail within this report which is statutory for us to communicate with you. But this summarises all the work that we've undertaken in year, and you have had all of this information presented to you at previous meetings, with the exception of the few reports that Lisa's going to take you through, which are included within this final report. So if I can ask you to turn to page 7 of the report, you'll see that this gives a visual representation of the progress against our plan. So this sets out all of the reviews that we agreed that we were going to undertake, provides an overview of the level of assurance that we provided for those reports, and also the number of recommendations which were raised, set against the high, medium, low and improvement ratings. there is no requirement for us to provide an assurance rating over the follow-up reviews, and you had 2 follow-up reviews on asset management and supplier resilience. That is where you received partial assurance in a prior period, prior review, and you wanted us to go back in as part of our plan and just have a look at the progress made against the recommendations made. However, due to the number of recommendations which we re-raised or kept open from those 2 reviews, I've provided an overview of the assurance so that you can see the assurance that you have overall across that plan. So there's some really good assurance at the top of the board where these are the standard reviews that we have to undertake. To ensure that we can deliver our head of internal audit opinion, we have to undertake work on your core financial controls, over risk management, over governance, and also some elements of data, and therefore we've undertaken a piece of work on GDPR. And for those 4 reviews, you received significant assurance with some improvement required. The areas which received partial assurance, it's worth noting, are areas of risk that were identified within the risk universe where we undertake our planning, and agreed with management that these were areas that you would like us to go in and review and have a look around, giving our views and thoughts and improvements as we identified them. So I think it's a balanced position. It's probably worth taking you now to page 10. You'll see here that overall we've provided significant assurance with some improvement required, which we've detailed within this opinion. This opinion will be used by your external auditors to sense check your disclosures within your annual governance statement, so it's quite a key piece of evidence for them. And what we've done is represented the risk ratings that we have provided within our risk triangle. So you'll see that for risk management and for governance, you've received yellow, which is the significant assurance with some improvement required, which was driven from the work that we undertook on those specific reviews. You'll see that we've provided a partial assurance rating over internal control, and that is where you directed us to areas within your general operating environment, and that reflects the number of partial assurance reviews that we have found in those areas. We've also provided a partial assurance on the implementation of agreed audit actions, noting that there aren't many overdue or outstanding actions at year end. However, what we found was that there was a final push at the year end to get a number of those closed down, and what we would like to see is a better engagement outside of the work of our direct contacts, but within the organisation, to really drive improvement and gain the value from internal audit by having recommendations implemented promptly, and actions being taken to mitigate the risks that we identify that you are facing. So on balance, we felt that the internal control and the implementation of the agreed audit actions wouldn't curtail a significant assurance with some improvement required opinion. That's the same opinion that you had last year. I'm just bringing to your attention that probably the recommendation, acting upon recommendations, is really key for you to drive that improvement and potentially gain a better assessment overall next year from your internal auditors. So we've provided a bit more information around the specific reviews that we've undertaken, net zero governance and adult education budget, and a bit of information that we have to provide on the recommendations. And as you can see, there's 4 overdue on page 13 but it does show that the amount that you've implemented, which is the 17 low risk and the 7 medium risk, have been pushed through, and there was a big support from management to get that position at year end. I'm going to pause there. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? No? No? You've got away with it? Carry on. Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was just say on behalf of everyone at the MCA, I just want to say thank you to GT colleagues for all the help and support over the last few years. Lisa in particular has been incredibly helpful to us. I think the reports have been fair, and we've had some really good challenge over the last few years. We've pointed our audit colleagues to some really thorny issues for us, and they've given us some really good advice, and we've started to implement that now. So it's just thank you, and all the best for future endeavours.
Thank you very much. So I
And
think
as a
I'm going to
committee,
hand
we'll
over.
endorse that.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to hand over to Lisa because I'm conscious that you've got a couple of reports that we haven't formally presented. I'm afraid I haven't seen an agenda, but I'm assuming they're the next items on the agenda.
Yes. Lisa?
Excellent. So if I hand over to Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. So the two reports that we've brought today are the last two pieces of work that we've completed that obviously contributes to our Head of Internal Audit opinion. The first I've brought is the work we've completed in respect of the adult education budget. We have provided a partial assurance with improvement required. This was an area of risk for the authority. We were guided to this piece of work as part of the audit plan based on that area of risk. So the issues that we've raised are predominantly around the contract management processes in place, and with the acknowledgement that we do understand that there has been some capacity issues within this section, and there has been some processes put in place now to carry forward into the future to address some of those issues. So that was the key driver for the assurance opinion on that piece of work. So I'm happy to pause there just for a moment to see if there's any questions on this particular report.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Not particularly questions on the report, but just to ask officers' views on are we putting the extra capacity in place now to cover these areas, and is this something that the new internal auditors can give us some assurance on when they follow up things in a year's time?
Thanks. So yeah, as Lisa says, the management of the AEB programme was one that I specifically asked to go on because we had some concerns in this area. Working with Lisa and team up front, and then following on from the recommendations, we recruited 10 officers just to work on AEB, and we've also recruited a further 2 with another one just interviewed this week to work in a compliance and quality function that sits in my area, whose role in life is simply to do spot checks throughout the academic year. So we have took quite a bit of resource at this, and we have been able to pull people in from outside to beef these teams up, and we take the recommendations in the report on the chin, and we recognise them. I think Internal Audit have this on work plan for this year.
Yeah, we've got it scheduled for February next year, so we'll do a detailed review then.
Okay. No more questions? Do you have anything further to say?
Shall I move on to the next report,
please,
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. No, that's great. Thank you. So the final report we've brought is our work that we've carried out in respect of the integration programme. So the focus and the scope of this review was limited to just the HR function of the whole integration project. So when we started this piece of work, it was almost a rolling project. So we almost completed the work alongside of the project as it's progressed during the year. So we've actually provided our review as an advisory piece, so more of a position statement in terms of where the authority landed. So there's a positive message in there to say that obviously on completion of timescales, you were an integrated authority, you got to where you needed to be. On balance, we did include some areas where we thought that in terms of the whole project management process during the year I think there was challenges in terms of pausing the project and then restarting the project, and we've just reflected that within our findings to say that perhaps the project management lessons learned could be taken forward into other projects in the future. So again, I'm happy to pause there and take any further questions.
I don't see any indications for questions. Continue, please. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just to add a little bit of context from Lisa's work and then link it to the PCC. Some of the challenge that I think Lisa's reflecting is that when we started the integration exercise, we were aiming for a formal integration of the 1st of April 2022, and then had to essentially pause and slow time some activity and repivot away from lots of practical integration activity associated with things like changing bank accounts onto cultural change. And we had to do that because government ran out of parliamentary time to pass the order that was necessary to dissolve SIPTI. And then that order came out of the blue in November of last year, and then we had to go like the clappers to get all the practical integration bits back on track and implemented. So there's a whole host of really good learning in this for how we approach PCC, because we are now going to be on the clock to get practical integration done by May 2024, but we might have to slow time some of the cultural integration to buy us time to do that in the next financial year. So Lisa's team have provided us with some really good feedback that I think we'll adopt in how we approach programme management for the OPCC changes.
Good. Yep, Lisa.
Thank you. That's everything from me, Chair.
Thank you very much for that report and for both reports. If there are no further questions or comments, then we'll note that report. Thank you very much, and thank you to both Emily and Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. We'll drop off now. Thank you.
Bye.
And then we'll move on to item 22, which is the tram concession programme plan.
Thank you, Chair. I will share my slides on screen. I'll try and keep it succinct to the best of my ability. Bear with me, I have a few different slides open right now. Thank you. I was asked to provide an update to the Audit Committee on the tram mobilisation, in particular on the milestone plan, the programme itself, and also discussing the resource provision as part of the tram mobilisation activity. So these slides are fairly detailed, but I'm really mindful of time as well, so I'll try to skim through them. So just to give you a little overview of what we need to achieve really as an organisation to bring the tram system into public control with effects from the 22nd of March 2024. So we have around 350 tram employees that need to be tupied into an arm's length organisation. We've got £100 million of investment to deliver under the CRSCS programme. We've got 32 trams to be operated. We have a 5-year business plan to be developed, and we also have about 250 supply contracts to renew. So this slide is just giving you a bit of a flavour as to the scale of the operations that we're needing to transition into as part of an arm's length organisation under Simca's control. Our two main objectives of this mobilisation activity are achieve a seamless transition, clearly on day one, and of course that operation has to be seamless beyond day one as well, but that is the minimum viable product essentially. And we also need to set up the new operating company for success, i.e. we need to make sure that there's sustainable success going forwards beyond the first day of that tram operation. So those are the two main aims of the programme, and that is a remit given also to the programme mobilisation team. So taking it into a little bit more detail, just to give you a flavour as to what we are mobilising for. So we have a number of programme structure activities on the go, the setup of the mobilisation programme itself, the information gathering, data and intelligence, as well as achieving a transition agreement around the existing concession agreements. So the three main programme structure work streams. First of all, the programme setup, i.e. the staffing of the programme itself with relevant and expert and competent mobilisation leads. Then clearly we need to ensure that we have a clear stakeholder and communication plan around this, and we also need to ensure that there's a detailed risk management and programme plan that is then followed through to the point of transition. Secondly, we have data and intelligence and discovery information. We don't have a concession agreement that has and gives us natural access to the typical data room setup, so we're working really closely with the tram operator to ensure that we understand fully what is within the operating organisation. We also need to close out the existing concession agreement. That's an element of demobilisation activity, and we need to make sure that all the outstanding and existing commitments are being fulfilled all the way through to March 2024. And that will be captured, those arrangements, within a transition agreement that we're creating with the tram operator. And then we have quite a few, 9 core mobilisation work streams. And please note that finance and safety are absolutely underpinning all of this as well. So that's important. They are overarching work streams. But the core mobilisation work streams are around legal, and I'll explain a little bit more how we have set ourselves up. Legal will ensure that we set up a wholly owned subsidiary at arm's length and make sure that a legal entity exists. It will help support setting up a new contract, i.e. a service level agreement between us and the operational organisation, so that there's performance management of that organisation as well seen through. So it's a contractual arrangement that ensures that the operating company knows what to expect. The governance and delegated authorities also will be set up with support of our legal work stream. Then we have, IT and infrastructure systems with a couple of key headline work streams that they are working on. People work stream, retailing systems work stream, because we will become a affairs retailer from day one, essentially, for the first time in a long time. Marketing work stream, procurement, because quite a significant volume of contracts to be either renewed, newly entered into, newly procured, or novated as it may be, or third-party service agreements may have to be set up. Then operational and safety is a key work stream, very critical. We have 2 people supporting that work stream, and we have engineering and safety compliance as well as core work streams. So just to move this on into a little bit more detail, and I won't go into the full milestone. There's much more detail behind this, but I won't go into the penultimate detail. There's a full milestone plan behind this, which I can share separately outside of this meeting. So if we look at the timeline, we're in June at the moment. We need to still complete a few outstanding roles in the mobilisation team, and we're actively recruiting for those. Those are work streams that are starting a little bit later in the process in any case, but I'll show that on a resource chart. And we have got a full baseline project plan that we're actively working towards delivering. So please bear in mind that a lot of this is now at the moment exploring, understanding the organisation, developing the options around each of those individual work streams, and then recommending to the SIMCO organisation a way forward as to what that would look like in terms of mobilisation activity for a day one seamless transition, as well as a 2-year business plan. So by October, we will have a wholly owned subsidiary, formally legally set up, maybe earlier as well, but we also will have a full appreciation and agreement on governance and delegated authority. So what would a board structure, for example, look like? By November, we will have completed a 2-year business plan, which will comprise not only the baseline expectations of the service delivery, but it will also say there's a number of interventions that need to be delivered over time. That could, for example, be something as simple as progressive rollout of smart retailing. It could be one of those interventions. So they will form a baseline service level agreement with the operator, which has underpinning committed obligations, but will also set out the KPIs and the key performance indicators that the operator is expected to deliver against. Clearly, with the MCA being essentially the subsidy provider to that system, to the new operational system with effect from March 2024, and it being a wholly owned subsidiary, the financials are one and the same. So the performance indicators are more likely to be around operational performance, customer performance, people performance factors, and appropriate incentives on the operating organisation to ensure that those get delivered, but also the appropriate tools. So there could be modernisation of some of the systems that are happening to support that. That will form integral part of those mobilisation activities to develop those interventions. Also, there will have to be an underlying financial model that underpins the future operations for several years forward, and that will link back into Garrett clearly in terms of the budget discussions. Then we also are looking at a first 100-day plan. So there will be a transitional period really where the changes will need to be embedded into new operating organisation, and by the time we get to November, we should also have a final draft service level agreement. And the reason why I'm pitching November as a key date, I think there may be some policy decisions and some other decisions to be taken by our MCA board around this. Then we move into January. All the corporate IT systems should be at go live mode. So where at the moment Stagecoach are providing underpinning systems, or where those systems are becoming obsolete, for example, we need to have new underpinning IT systems. And it could be as basic as your Office 360 system that people in the office use, but there are also more complicated operational systems that need to be live and go live on day one, but under our tenure. And that is really important that we have get that right, because they can often be long lead time items. Key decisions flowing from that are, for example, where does the control of shared services sit? And those discussions are really live. We haven't concluded all of that as yet. This is actively in progress, all of this. So please bear with me. But for example, should the new operating organization have a section in our in the Simca finance section, finance systems, or should it have a standalone finance system? Those questions are being asked right now, are being explored right now, and we'll be close to concluding those over the next few weeks. But that will then set us up saying, actually, do we need to go to procurement? That will determine the next stages really of that work stream in particular. Then we very critical, clearly, safety management system. We're working very closely with the ORR on that. We have to develop a safety case, clearly, for tram train operations, and that has to be underpinned by a really solid safety management system. And that is actively being worked on in collaboration with the business as usual tram services team, which sits in Tim's area, and the mobilisation team, to ensure that we have a really robust safety management system within that organisation going forward. Procurement contracts, they all need to be completed by and ready essentially to put dates on the contracts, essentially, date them and execute them by Feb 2024. We would like to see the transition agreement with the existing operator closed out by that point as well. There will be asset handback condition surveys by the back end of this year, December time. And there needs to be a retail go live testing happening in Feb for sure, because we need to make sure that we can retail fares effectively from day one, and that is an absolute minimum requirement. It's very important that we get that one right. Then we have day one go live on the 22nd of March. We have a launch campaign that we'll probably have, and we're also looking to conclude the TUPE arrangements on that date, because we cannot do that before then, clearly, for legal reasons. So day one launch, apologies for the typos in my box below. So this is actually in operation, so the grey box at the bottom is saying, actually, once we're in operations, what are we doing to have a day one launch? We have a 100-day plan, which is looking to embed some of the changes and make sure we work closely with the operating teams to ensure there's an embedment period that may last a bit longer if so needed, but at the moment we're looking at a 100-day plan. And then a 2-year business plan that needs to be socialised, and the organisation needs to be set up to actually start delivering against a service level agreement. So I've got a lot of detail in the next few slides. Bear with me. So I will not, all of this is breaking this out with some delivery dates, but as you can see in the round, there's a little bit of slippage on the resourcing in the mobilisation team by roughly a month. We're actively recruiting. It's a difficult candidates market out there to get staff, but that is all in train, and all the critical roles are now in place, and I think that's really important to note. There's a tiny bit of slippage on the handover arrangements for assets under charge. We now think that's going to be concluded as part of the transition agreement in November as opposed to September. So these are the high-level milestone dates. I will share these slides clearly after, mindful of time. It breaks out each of those work streams in a little bit more granular detail. There is a big project plan, a big Gantt chart with over 1,000 lines, I believe, on it, which you're very welcome to have if you would like to see a bit more detail on this. So I'll skip through these and go on to the resourcing, if that's okay, Chair. So resourcing, so mobilisation team resource structure. So we have an interim structure in place that is comprising essentially what I call industry heavy handlers, I like to say, experts in the field of operations who have got quite significant experience in mobilizing, for example, rail franchises, tram operations from one contractual situation to another contractual situation. Our light rail program director has previously supported the transition from of a heavy rail company into directly operated railways, DOHL, to support central government with that transition. So vastly experienced team that we have in place. They're here in the interim, typically until May. Some may stay on a little bit longer to help with the transition arrangements. The roles in dark green, if people can see them, I know it's fine print, I'm afraid, apologies. It's always the same with these org structures. The roles in dark green are in post, and the roles in light green have recruitments in progress or are soon to be appointed to the positions. So light rail program director overseeing the overall program. They also look after the asset renewal. Tram asset renewal, the £100 million investment, so we have clear alignment between the investment need under CRSCS and the forward business plan of the tram mobilisation. So that is a segue that's not shown in this structure because that's a separate project management structure. There's a program support, a project support, just to help coordinate the numerous meetings that we have. And there's a program manager who's in charge of risk management, mobilisation, interdependencies, and all the usual stuff. They were looking for a scheduler to help support that individual just to go into a greater level of detail in terms of reporting and in terms of progress monitoring, and that role is being recruited for. We have a retail lead looking after and ensuring that we can retail on day one. We have a procurement lead looking after the contractual and the procurement arrangements that we need to not only ensure that the supply chain is kept intact for the tram operations, but also that we follow appropriate procurement processes. There's a vast volume of contractual change to be achieved. Commercial and finance lead, they are in charge with the financial model and the business plan in its own right. So all of the financial work streams come together in the commercial and finance lead. The marketing lead is not yet in situ, but they are charged with the marketing strategy, the branding, and the launch plan. Then we have a comms lead who would help to support stakeholder communications plan, but also elements of internal communications, because staff communications is very vital. So although we have a people lead in place already, that's a big work stream, and I think that whole communication piece is really critical. We get that right alongside the vision, the values, and starting to develop that with the operating organisation. The more operationally critical roles are in the engineering lead, who are looking after the depot and the asset management plan, also the infrastructure and the tram. So they will develop that element of the handover process, but also inform the business plan around that and the key performance indicators. And the operations lead, who is looking in charge of the safety case that needs to be developed with the ORR and signed off. And also revenue protection and the general operations in terms of timetable, service level, etc. Supported by an operations manager, because there's quite a lot of detail in the operational work stream, in particular also because of the safety aspects in this. People lead, I've mentioned, in charge of 2P pension arrangements and staff engagement. And then we have an IT lead in charge of setting up the IT systems and ensuring that the infrastructure, IT infrastructure is also in place, like the servers, the laptops, all the other systems are up and running. So that is how the team is shaped. So just to give you a flavour how that links into the core work streams, which I put up on the slides earlier. So I would welcome any questions, Chair. So thank you.
Thank you. Very comprehensive report. I don't know what the timeline was on presenting this, but it would have been more useful if we'd had the slides earlier. If we'd been able to see the slides, perhaps it was, the timeline wasn't such that you could. But I would appreciate them being sent out with the minutes. Yeah, that's good. So, questions or comments, please?
Just a quick one then. You've clearly got a huge amount to do in a short period of time. How confident are you that you're going to get it all done and be able to land this by 1st of April?
I am very confident. I think we need to make sure that we focus on not only the minimum viable product, the essential activities. It's really critical, clearly, on day one. We have the operations all transitioned. I'm very comfortable with the program. I think we have, from my previous experience, there have been transitional processes that have been delivered within 4 months, not in the 10 plus months that we still have. And that is for much larger operations. Notwithstanding, this is a relatively small operation, believe it or not. The complexities are still there. All the activities still need to be done. But I've seen, for example, a heavy rail organization having been mobilized within 4 months. Not ideal. I think we have time. I think there are long lead time items that we need to keep a very close watching brief on, setting up finance systems, etc. There are some definite long lead time items, and there are risks. Getting a good safety management system in place, getting ORR sign off for a safety case. There are certainly risks to the program, but I'm confident we have a very competent team in place, having experienced this previously. So I'm in a good place with it.
Good. Well, you sound very confident at least. Yes. And yes.
Ian, do you want to go first?
I was just going to say, I was sitting here quaking at that list. I'm going to bookmark that bit of the video. It seems enormous to me, so I suppose I'm very impressed by your confidence.
Absolutely.
There would be nothing more to add, really, Chair.
Okay. I think that confidence is shared by us all.
Yeah, I think the trams will run themselves the day after handover. The bit I think that's the risk area is getting the commercials, the contracts novated in particular, because you need electricity and you probably need spare parts as well. Brakes will be what will stop them, no pun intended. And then the other big thing is that legal safety case and getting that through. To me, those are the ones that are the risk areas. Whereabouts is insurance in all this, by the way?
Insurance is a live work stream. We're talking to Sizel's current insurance broker and ours at the moment. Right. So I'm not sure where it fits on there, but
because I think you need that to get your safety case to cover that. And so what's the overall management of this? Does the programme director report to you, Pat? Or is there a project board above this?
They report to me. There are various different advisory groups, boards, tram boards, but without the full decision-making authority. So further decision-making is going through the normal MCA decision-making processes. There's a core budget supporting the work, which is already approved, so we are working within that budget available right now for the mobilisation. There may be, essentially any changes in policies, etc., will go through the formal decision-making process with the MCA.
And with the change in governance, have we got the dates programmed when we need key decisions by MCA board to fit in with that?
They are part of the more detailed project plan.
Right. And the board, MCA board's adequately briefed on progress? Do they get
That is absolutely part of the stakeholder engagement planning process, but also on the pre-briefing process. So there will be some key decisions we anticipate according to the plan to be taken in November time. There's some time scheduled already on that MCA board. That is essentially the key decision point, and there will be a detailed briefing process in the run-up to that as part of a wider engagement process.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Pat.
If I just offer possibly 3 observations that the committee might like to keep an eye on as we progress through the big amount of it seems like an inexorable amount of activity that we need to work through. The first is that there are clearly budget implications associated with all this. So the timeline Pat has just showed you intersects with our levy engagement sessions. So the budget sessions that I have with directors of finance, building up to us agreeing the levy in 2024 January. And there's a whole bunch of work that is going on at the moment to try and understand what a day one budget might look like, what a future year budget business plan might look like. But that's quite kind of difficult to do because we don't have all the right information at this point to do that. We don't have a long storied experience in running all this, so I'd keep your eye on that one. The second is around systems. So Pat's talked about all the different systems that are required. So this isn't in many ways like an acquisition or a merger where you're taking a body of activity and you're just changing the name above the door. In many ways, the people might be the same, but the systems will have to change because Stagecoach are leaving and they're not leaving us a finance system in place, a HR system, and so on and so on. So we will need new systems, but with the same body of people, and there will be a whole bunch of training activity that is required before go live to make sure that on day one, everyone is confident in using all those new systems and that equipment. And the third point, I think committee might like to focus on as we go forward is that we can look at individual timelines like this, but we really need to keep an eye on how these timelines coalesce with other major change projects. So Pat's also working on bus franchising, we'll have the PCC activity. And there's a risk that in all this, unless we really join the dots, that it's the same person in the back office in this organisation who's doing the same piece of activity, and they're on one timeline, but actually they're doing three things at once if you're not careful. So I suggest if we just keep pulling this back, three major change pieces of activity that we need to, as a committee, to be looking at, and we'll provide you updates as we go.
Yes, just to follow up to that, Chair, then, and in terms of the existing operator, do we have agreements that commit them to giving us their staff time to learn about new ticketing systems, new finance systems, whatever?
Yes, as part of any change, we're looking at the training requirements as well, arising from any new systems being put in place. That is integral part of the decision-making process and the planning process. So if there's a new retailing system, which is probably less likely, but if there's a new retailing system, there would be training provided as part of that. Setup of that system and staff involvement in that. It's critical we do that. We too often just launch brand new systems without actually giving people the education that supports them using those systems really effectively. So it's a critical part of it.
Absolutely. So are Stagecoach amenable, or better still, contractually committed to give us their staff's time to learn those new systems?
No, they're not.
They're not. Right. So I think that is a definite risk.
And therefore, as such, some of these decisions are either to be done in collaboration with the existing operator and by mutual agreement, clearly, or where this is not possible because clearly their teams are there to operate the trams in the first place, where a launch or a change of system may have to happen on T+2 months, or it may not be a day one, and hence we also have a 100-day plan to ensure that transitional phase can be accommodated.
Okay, thank you.
So not contractually obliged, but are they amenable?
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
Although in some instances, Chair, they're charging us for that time.
Well, I was going to say,
know?
yeah, we should definitely expect a bill for this, which I'm sure we've got in the project budget.
Okay. In terms of bringing this back for tracking progress, will that come here or will it go to your subgroup, do you think?
I think probably we might do the detail in the subgroup.
Right.
But certainly I think this committee needs oversight on as part of our regular items to look at this one.
Yeah, so it comes back here, you'll take the detail.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good, well we look forward to seeing the progress on that.
Fabulous.
Very well done, thank you very much.
And thank you very much for your feedback, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving breathlessly on. suggesting a break or just bash on?
Oh, just carrying on, but does anyone
Oh, yeah.
leave? That's all.
Are we all okay to carry on? Yeah? Okay.
We don't have a rule, do we? We have to extend standing orders and we have to keep watch on time on Sheffield committees. After, I think, 2.5 hours we have to vote.
I think we'll be done.
Yes, I think so. I'm sure.
No master bit rumbling.
That's my recommendation.
We're less generous in balance, it's 2 hours, but we often overrun. Okay. If anybody does want coffee, incidentally, here it is. Try and keep us all awake. Where am I? I'm on 18 now, aren't I? Yeah, okay. Sorry, Audit.
No problem. So,
progress of the internal audit plan.
yeah, so as we presented the plan last month to this committee, we're just doing a bit of a verbal update as to progress since last month. So, since the plan's been approved, we have scheduled all the internal audits in terms of timings. They're in diaries now. We've got all the planning meetings for the year set up as well with the exec directors and the key individuals within those areas. We have had the planning meeting and the scope been issued for the bus data quality framework piece, which kicks off next week. We've had the scoping meeting for cyber security, which is underway in July. And the next internal audit after that is TRAM, doing that kind of quick sense check in September time, looking at kind of the governance arrangements and, you know, kicking the tide as to that presentation we've just seen then. But overall, we're happy with kind of progress we've made since the plan was last presented last month, and I'm happy to take any questions that committee may have on internal audit going forward.
No. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
That was a quick item.
Yeah.
Thank you. Risk management, Claire. I'm not trying to say it all.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the dashboard report. It's in the same format, although it's evolving slightly from cycle to cycle as the previous one. It's really just to take any feedback on that format or any other further information that you want to see in that report going forward. And if you've got any specific questions on any of the risks, then between us we'll try and answer those or take them away for further comment and get back to you. Thank you.
Just very quickly, on the summary, you mentioned that the risk relating to the bus service improvement plan has deteriorated and now exceeds the risk appetite for the risk. So what are we doing to get it within our risk appetite?
I will hand that over to Gavin.
So where to start? So when we set the transport levy in January 2024, we set a financial strategy that was largely predicated around using as much of our financial strength through reserves as possible, or as comfortable as I could get, to protecting as many services through to the end of the school term in summer 2023. And that was predicated on an assumption that bus funding would be withdrawn in March. So if you recall, the last few years, bus funding has largely marched us to the edge of a cliff on really short-term cycles. So we'd use our financial resource to protect what we could until July 23, and then we'd have to accept that there would be a whole array of services that we simply couldn't support any longer. What's changed since then is that government agreed to fund us over Q4 of the last financial year, and again over Q1 of the current financial year. And then they announced that there would be a big amount of money, about £500 million, that would go into supporting services over a longer period. And that was quite the prospect for us at that moment, and we thought that that would be a substantial sum of money that would be heading towards South Yorkshire. What's come to pass is that government have announced that most of that money that they set aside will actually go towards supporting the continuation of the £2 fare cap on bus. And I think that's £2 to October, rising to £2.50 thereafter. Yeah. So the majority of the money has gone on price incentives, and there is a relatively low level of money that will be made available to the MCA for subsidised intended services, i.e. those non-commercial services that we buy back. So we've been we've been informed that we'll receive £3.1 million for the current financial year, and we expect that it'll be roughly the same for the following financial year. Now that's set against pressures probably upwards about 25 million, Tim, if we wanted to.
Total tender service cost expectations over the next 3 years are 42 million, and we're getting 6.2, 6.3 million.
Yeah. So on a multi-year basis, there's the scale of retaining all the services that we've got, retaining all the concessionary support that we choose to put into the system is simply beyond us. And that's the reality, that we won't be able to protect everything, and the money that government have put into the system has largely gone at price incentives rather than, or price subsidies rather than overall subsidised services. So this looks like an almost intractable situation in the longer term, but we do have some options, and those options largely rest around what we do with the reserves that we've got available to us that are still awaiting deployment. But Tim, do you want to talk about the process we're going through now?
Yeah, no, certainly. Just briefly. So we agreed on the 5th of June MCA to defer decisions about those significant, or what are likely to be significant reductions in bus network until the start of September, to allow us to do a proper level of engagement with members, particularly local authority leaders and elected members more generally, through the remainder of this month and into early July, to take a decision then to the end of July MCA board, which sets out and ratifies the proposed approach of prioritisation of services, further changes to policy that might eke out more funding from the process, so a reduction in frequency of services, for example, but also policy choices we've got around particularly things like the child notified fare, which has not changed for a number of years thus far, and we do have options about reducing our cost burdens in that space. So all of those are as yet undecided. We're going through engagement process. We have a workshop with the leaders planned for next week where we'll start to surface some of these discussions, and then ultimately take that decision through wider discussion and consultation through to the MCA at the end of July.
So that largely explains why it feels quite uncomfortable at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, it's clearly a big risk, isn't it? But
yeah. And the decision to continue with the £2 fare at the risk of others was the government decision.
Yeah, and that's fully funded by central government. What it does do is place an additional pressure on South Yorkshire as to our continuation of supporting the tram equivalent fare cap, which is locally funded.
Would we have chosen to do differently?
Had we known that central government was likely to continue to extend the the bus fare cap, then I think we would have made probably a more considered choice at the time. It was made very clear to us ahead of the decision that was made in mid-May that it was almost impossible that the fare cap was going to be extended. In fact, it was actually extended anyway from the end of March. It was originally due to end in March of this year. We're now, as I say, facing a 20-month give or take extension to that scheme, which places that burden on us from a tram perspective. We have options about how we might want to choose to do that or price that, and again, that's part of the policy options that are being presented and considered by the leaders starting next week through to July.
Tim, I guess I think the question was more if we had a choice of that government money, if it went towards £2 fare cap or it went towards tender services.
Absolutely, no. If the entire 500 million was available for deployment, our strong recommendation would be to put that all into protecting tender services, absolutely, because the fare cap initiative, whilst is beneficial in terms of encouraging people to use bus services, not game-changing in the sense of repairing the patronage damage that was done through COVID. It is clearly a cost of living benefit for the people that benefit from reduced fares, but it's not transformational, and maintaining a level of adequate bus network is the primary benefit. There's not much point having a fare cap if you don't have a bus to get on, as some of our elected members have reminded us. So, that's really our primary focus. But department under pressure from number 10 have looked to put in place the fare cap continuing, should I say?
Yeah, we have seen this before from this government, whereby they give us all the responsibility, none of the authority.
And so just to provide a final bit of context in terms of scaling the challenge that Gareth described. So we have 6.2, 6.3 million through till March of 2025. And again, without drawing direct comparisons with our neighbours, but West Yorkshire have got an equivalent of about 77 million at their disposal from the same funding sources. So they've got a different order of magnitude with which to, also still make difficult decisions, but in a completely different scale to what we face and the challenges that we may have to consider.
Well, we are where we are. Everyone content with the report? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 20, transport risk. Working group. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I think the key thing to report back from the meeting which we held on Monday is the progress with Bernard Road, and thank you very much to Tim and Councillor Auckland for the representations that they've made to Sheffield on this particular issue. There is a report in the pack with a good picture and a diagram of the operation, but to save time, the key point I think that's emerged is that the investigation's shown that the traffic light phasing is such that it's possible to have a red light and a green light displaying at the same time. Green light if you want to turn right into Cricket Inn Road, and a red light if you want to go left into Cricket Inn Road. Unfortunately, if someone gets in the wrong lane and is going straight ahead across to Bernard Road, they could misread the green light and then continue forward. There is, however, another stop line which they should go at, but if people don't follow the instructions properly, that will ultimately take them into potential conflict with the tram. So the solution is to change the signal phasing so that you get red lights at the same time. And that, I understand from Tim, is a relatively simple task to do. And the only thing we're waiting on Sheffield doing is giving us a date when that should be changed.
And I now have a proposed date.
Brilliant.
10th of July is the date that they're proposing on that after a discussion yesterday. And I think maybe if we just take the report on the agenda at this point in time to add to Paul's description. My only other comment in respect of the board is that it has taken an awfully long time to get to a point where we are now finally making those changes, and we're almost 2 years on from that event actually occurring to a point of making mitigations relative to the risk that was presented as a consequence of that. So this will be a feature of our ongoing operations post-concession, and we'll want to make sure we've got those strong relationships with the local authorities as well in terms of management of these kinds of risks in respect of operating a system of this scale and complexity going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Seems to me an eminently sensible thing to do, to have two stops at the same time. I mean, you only need to be a relative stranger to that situation and crisis straight away, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think in terms of the length of time that the committee has taken to deal with it, it's not our fault, Gov. It's clearly been someone else who hasn't acted when we've asked them to.
Yeah, and I think that the positive thing is, and thanks again to Councillor Auckland and Tim's team for the work that they've done, is that this committee has got hold of it, and we have progressed it, and we've, I think, got a positive result out of it if it's going to be sorted in 2-3 weeks' time.
Yeah, just to clarify, Chair, that wasn't a criticism of this board in terms of the progress made. I think it's a frustration on behalf of the board and us operationally.
It was just an opportunity from the Chair to confirm it's not our fault. Yes.
I think I should have nothing to say, Chair. Go ahead.
So, do members have any further questions on Bernard Road? Other points that we discussed was the risk register and the key risks, I think, that have been pulled out there on things like sustainability of bus operation. We've already discussed at this board in other items and on the risk register, so I wouldn't propose to add anything to that unless you wanted to say anything, Tim.
No, I think I think it's reflective of the conversations that have taken place, the items that we covered on Monday as well. So that's reassuring in itself.
Thank you. So unless there's any further questions, that's it.
Thank you very much for that. I think we've probably covered Bernard Road, have we?
Yes, Chair, unless there's any further questions, thank you.
Okay, moving on. Thank you very much. And we're into final annual government statement. Claire.
I'll make this quick. So this report presents the final version of the annual governance statement. The committee previously received a draft version, but this version is the one that went to the MCA board on the 5th of June. It had been amended to include the highest rated risks, corporate risks, which was suggested by the committee. It's just really to note that now we've received the final head of internal audit opinion, that it will be amended slightly further just to include that, because this version has still got the draft in. So it's just really for information and to know on that one. Thank you.
Okay, so nothing further on that. We'll note that. And item 24, governance improvement plan.
So this is just the regular update on the governance improvement plan, just gives a progress update. Obviously this is the first kind of quarter in since the plan was approved by the committee, and it forms part of that annual governance statement at the previous item. So it's just a progress report to note, really. Happy to take any queries back.
Yes.
Did I see something in this report about there's a quarterly compliance report that's published, or was that in the previous one?
I think that might relate to there's a quarterly some activity where we monitor compliance with the Code of Corporate Governance, which obviously has got much more detail in, and this governance improvement plan does kind of relate to that. So that's something that I do, and then that feeds into the annual governance review in Q4 and into the AGS preparation for next year. But the governance improvement plan is kind of a bit of a truncated version of it.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Content?
Yep.
Good. Thank you. Moving on to Gareth, breach of controls report, please.
None to report. Thank you.
That was brief. Well done. Issues for escalation. Are there any issues for escalation? No. Okay, that brings me to the end of my agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.